Welcome to A Gentleman's Review. My name is Arthur Hampton. I'm your host. And today joining me is former Representative Jonathan Hill. And he has this thing called the Bad Bill Sheet. And I want him to talk to us a little bit about some of the bills and what would he identify as a bad bill, or what a good bill looks like, and some of the principles that he goes off on there. And thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely, Art. I appreciate you having me.
Excellent. So tell us, what's your philosophy behind coming out with this bad bill sheet? What thought process do you use to identify a good or a bad bill?
Yeah, well, great question. And by way of background, the Bad Bill Sheet is a project that I started while I was serving as a state legislator in House District 8 here in South Carolina. Um, Internally, as an office, memo, really to myself and any other interested legislators that there might have been. It wasn't public initially, and uh, eventually I came to see that really this deserved to be published to the entire state network of conservative activists and activist organizations. Um, as far as the methodology is concerned, you know, it is important to read the actual text of the legislation. It's even more important to comprehend it. Those are not the same things. So definitely strive to do both. But then, even if you read it and even if you comprehend it, you're not necessarily going to come to the right conclusions unless you have a very strong conservative foundation to your thinking. And all the above, in my experience, are sorely lacking among legislators, even Republican legislators here in our state and in other states. It's not a problem that's unique to South Carolina. The So I ended up developing for myself, because I do think that it's important to support and oppose bills um, based on objective criteria, not on subjective criteria. So I actually came up with 12 specific criteria, and if any of these elements are present in a bill, I would vote against it. And those are the same criteria that I use today. I look at any bill that comes up that is moving. I define that as any bill that is placed on a committee agenda or a floor agenda that might get a vote, that could get a vote. Um, there are thousands of bills that get filed that just it's not possible to humanly possible with for one person in a timely manner to actually um, rate every single bill that gets filed, and it's not necessary to do so. So, does a bill lack substance? Is a bill non-binding or enfor- uh, lack enforcement mechanisms? Is it illegal? Is it unlawful or unconstitutional? Does it grow government in terms of adding new programs or adding new employees to government? Does it reduce the accountability of state government by putting um, more degrees of separation between the voters and the bureaucrats? Does it contradict separation of powers by, say, for instance, having the legislature encroach on executive responsibilities or vice versa? Does it constitute legal plunder? That's a fun one to talk about. Does it infringe on our rights and liberties? Is there a non-government alternative? In other words, can you look in the yellow pages and find a solution to this problem? If so, then the government doesn't need to be doing it. Does it raise taxes or fees? And you know, eh, that can also be, does it increase spending in a significant way? Because big spending increases are going to also drive tax increases. Does it increase state debt or lead to that or enable that to happen? And finally, there's kind of an other or catch-all category. Does, usually we're looking at things, is this a demonstrably bad policy? Has it been tried in other states and failed to work? Things like that. We've had some, criminal law bills that included mandatory minimums, for instance, that fell into that category. So those are the 12 criteria.
Nice, nice. And so, one of them you mentioned, it was if you can look in the yellow pages and
Hmm.
find it. If the private sector's doing it, why do they need competition? Explain that a little bit more. I mean, if the private sector's already doing it, why do we need to do it?
Yeah, right. So when it comes to providing a service, for one thing, the state should never be in competition with the private sector. Um, I'm a free market capitalist. I've been accused of being libertarian. I'm not a libertarian philosophically, but I do share some libertarian, I guess, positions on certain issues. But um, you know, liability insurance for certain industries, for instance, um, funding for marketing for particular industries. These are never things that the state should be doing, whether it's for healthcare insurance or whether it's for crop insurance for farmers or whether it's funding for tourism, marketing, or anything like that. These are not things that we give tax dollars or have tax dollars taken from us, um, to rightly be able to fund those things. That's a job for the private sector. And some of those questions also relate to the legal plunder question. Legal plunder is um, a term that was coined, best of my knowledge, by Frederick Bastiat, who was a 19th century thinker and philosopher that was very influential on libertarians. And he talks a lot about legal plunder, which is, you know, he starts with the basic idea that the government exists to protect life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, as it was put in our Declaration of Independence, or life, liberty, and property. Um, but he notes, as he develops this idea out in his short book, The Law, which, in my opinion, should be required reading for every legislator or activist, um, that he says it's human nature to want to take the easiest path to survival, and quite honestly, um, you can get what you need by hard work, or you can get what you need by taking other people's hard work from them. And one of these is easier than the other, especially when government gets involved. And so it is possible, he demonstrates it, to take the very law that was intended to protect life, liberty, and property, and invert that around to actually take life or take liberty or take property from others. And that's what he terms legal plunder. Plunder by force of law. And in that sense, at least, I completely agree with the libertarian slogan that all taxation is theft. Um, but here we're coming up on tax day here in a few short weeks, and try not paying your taxes and see what the government does to you if you don't believe that. So, one of my mantras, on questions like these, as I served in the legislature, was there's never anything honorable about being generous with other people's money.
Yeah.
If you forcibly take money by taxation and then generously give that to any number of worthy causes, that is an immoral act, not a moral act.
It's not only legal plunder, it's redistribution of wealth, which he talks
Exactly what
about in
it
the
is.
Communist
Yes.
Manifesto,
Yep.
or what modern day people like to say, crony capitalism.
Right. Right.
It's funny because in the public schools they certainly don't talk about Friedrich Bastiat, but there was a group of homeschoolers that came by one of the JBS booths that we had set up, and one of the little kids walks up and goes, I think he might have been, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something like that. And the homeschooling mom was taking them through the Tuttle twins, and they talk about
Yeah.
Friedrich Bastiat, and he goes, "Ooh, the law, Friedrich Bastiat." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what that is. You know who he is, don't you?" Yeah. And
That's
it
awesome.
was like somebody's teaching them something. So it was
The
it brought
sad thing
great.
is that 8-year-old is way ahead of 99% of politicians in the entire United States.
Yeah, sadly. Um, I think it was it Calvin that said, when God wants to judge a nation, He gives them wicked rulers.
Mm,
And I think that's sometimes I look at what we got, and or certainly what we had,
right.
and say, wow, that is definitely judgment. So go through some of the other ones in a little bit more detail. What's some of the other ones you
Yeah.
mentioned?
Yeah, let's flesh some of these out. Here's a good one. Let's talk about taxes for a minute. There are the obvious things, right? If a bill, just straight up raises the income tax or the sales tax, that's an easy one. It's clear what's going on. But there are a lot of not obvious ways that taxes get raised, and so it's important, not only to read the bill thoroughly, but also to comprehend the bill and to comprehend it in context with the larger statute and with the political history of the state or the local jurisdiction that's involved. I'll give you two examples that I saw during my time in office. On one example is there's this thing called Act 288 in, or I'm sorry, it might be Act 388, whichever one it was. It was the one that um, lowered property taxes to a certain extent in exchange for raising the sales tax a penny. So it was ostensibly it was a tax swap. It wasn't a tax cut. It shifted the burden of taxation from one tax to another a little bit. And generally those are bad ideas because they tend to result over in the long term the total tax burden actually going up, because when you raise one tax and you lower the other, eventually the one that you lowered ends up getting raised. So now you're paying two higher taxes rather than it being a fair tax swap. But the reason I bring that up is because included in that bill was a very strict limitation on how local cities and towns in South Carolina could raise their taxes. They could only raise it a maximum of a percentage of the previous year's uh, millage, so it could only go up a certain amount each year, and it was capped at that. Um, Now, what that meant is if you have an unincorporated city or county, uh, not county, I misspoke there. If you have an unincorporated city in South Carolina, let's say a town that's not an incorporated city, that's not currently levying tax, and there were actually about a dozen of these around the state a few years ago, that there was a push to incorporate them and to fund the new town government using property taxes. Well, guess what? A percentage of zero is always going to be zero. So it had the effect of preventing any new cities that might start from ever levying a tax without changing the state law. So someone put up a state law to create an exemption for these new towns to say that in their first year they can, come up with their initial tax rate, and then after that the tax hike limit will apply. That is a bill to raise taxes. Now, fortunately, we killed that bill. Um, but I mean, those are the kinds of things that where it's not quite so obvious what's going on, but it would raise taxes if you allowed it to go forward. Another one is a bill to put a tax on a public referendum to say, well, we're going to, you know, give a city or a county the option to raise, uh, let's say, transportation taxes, for instance, but only if the people vote to do that. They can put this on the ballot, and then if it passes on the ballot, then they can raise the taxes. If the state passes a law like that, that is as good as raising the tax, right? So any bill that directly or enables for a tax to be imposed or increased, that's going to be considered a tax hike. And so, that's why I emphasized at the beginning, it's important to have all three elements. You can't just read the bill, you have to comprehend the bill in context. And you have to interpret that through a lens, a solid um, conservative lens, uh, which, quite frankly, even those people who read the bills often lack, because where are you going to get this knowledge or education, unless you have made it a point to self-study it by reading great conservative thinkers like Frederick Bastiat, like Henry Hazlitt, who wrote Economics in One Easy Lesson, and a number of others that we could name. Unless you've done that, you certainly aren't getting that in public schools. You certainly aren't getting that from the politicians or from the media or from talk show hosts or whatever. And a lot of people, let's face it, they get their political education from listening to somebody like Rush Limbaugh, back in the day, or something like that. Not knocking them, but that's not really a conservative education. What a conservative president like Donald Trump says is not a conservative education, nor is it consistent set of conservative principles.
Well, I like to say, and you tell me what you think about this. Trump, he was good friends with the Clintons.
Hmm.
He back in the '90s. Trump is probably where the Clintons would be on the scale back in the '90s. But we have gone
Hmm.
so far left that a liberal in the '90s is now conservative.
Right.
Is that a good
Yeah.
assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I do. What Trump is, he's not a conservative. He is a populist. Those are different things.
Mhm.
Sometimes populists will have some positions that overlap with conservative positions, but you can't characterize the whole thing as conservative by any means.
So while we're
So
on time,
I have been involved in Republican circles. I ran as a Republican. I served as a Republican. Um, Actually, the House Republican Caucus kicked me out for not towing the party line often enough uh, back in 2019. Um, and I was very okay with that. Actually, that was a great day. Actually, the day they chose to do that. But I think that it's vitally important. And by the way, you're not going to get a conservative education from reading the Constitution of the United States. A lot of people think, you know, and they want to have Constitution study courses and things like that. Not knocking that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with studying the Constitution. Just it only goes as far as it goes. Okay. Um, and if you're studying the state constitution, actually, that is very unconservative in many areas. It's
yes,
terrible. Um, it's a horrible state constitution, and there's a lot of need for changing it. Unfortunately, it's also notoriously difficult to change it here in South Carolina. So, um, if I could impress on folks the need to not just be informed, but to be informed with the right kind of lens that you're not going to get unless you think for yourself, and in particular, unless you actually read books. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. You're going to have to read some books in order to have a good conservative framework of analyzing policy.
absolutely. And scholarship is kind of gone by the wayside, especially with the advent of a podcast. People aren't
Hmm.
scholars anymore. They're what I call pseudo podcast scholars. They listen to
Right,
some people on a topic and they go back and forth and they think they know it in and out, but they haven't actually read anything in depth. It's just the conversation piece of what
right,
this is or what that is. And there, these buzzwords. I think about 6 months, a year or so ago, and it's still the buzzword now within Christendom, Christian nationalism, and you go back and forth about what this is, what it is not, yada yada yada. And you ask 10 people what Christian nationalism is, and you get 20 different answers because there's 1,000 podcasts you can listen to on it, and they all dance around the issue and they don't really address the thing when there was a book written on it. And I'm the actual scholar that took the time to sit down and read the book on it, and different things like that. So, but we're talking about taxes, and so let me ask you this: why is it? And I've seen this on the states, the state level, the federal level, the even the local level. Why is it that everybody wants lower taxes, but then when they get in office, they seem to forget that they live in the same county or in the same district that they're raising the taxes on, and then you're going to have to pay the same taxes that I'm going to have to pay. What
yeah,
happens to them?
yeah. That's an excellent question, and the more general form of that question would be, why do we send good people into office and they immediately turn bad as soon as they take office? And it's a question that I certainly puzzled over for a while, and then I served in office, and I got a bit of a bigger perspective on how politics works. And I can tell you this, that there is not a single politician anywhere in the United States that is totally a free agent. Okay, in the sense that they are completely independent of anyone and everyone, and they are totally a free thinker, and they always and only do what they think is right. Um, there's no human being in office that is actually like that. Every single politician is subject to some degree to the political stresses and forces that that come to bear on them. And So, somewhat jokingly, only somewhat jokingly, I impress on activists the idea that you should never, ever, ever let a politician vote their conscience. They don't have a conscience. You have a conscience. You be their conscience. You make them do what you know to be right. Right. That should be our perspective and attitude when it comes to our politicians. Um, you know, and I'm not lying, and I'm not making this up. I mean, many politicians of days gone by have bragged about this. There's the somewhat famous example of Senator Everett Dirksen at the federal level, who is known for the saying, "When I feel the heat, then I see the light." But when you take that quote actually in context, you understand he was bragging about that. He was saying that was a good thing. That was saying why he was such a great and smart legislator. Was when I feel the heat, then I see the light. So I made it my mission, understanding that in the legislature, and we have to make that our mission uh, even today. And I think this is always going to be our mission. That we're going to make it as difficult and as painful as humanly possible for our politicians to do the wrong thing. It's how we
So,
raise our kids, right? When they do wrong, they experience consequences, and hopefully we spare them of the more serious consequences, perhaps mortal consequences that life can dish out to you when you make certain kinds of mistakes. By training kids, by letting them know that their actions have consequences as young kids.
so speaking of that, how do we hold our legislators to the fire? As a former state rep, how do you want to be approached? How do you to by your constituents? How do we, as constituents, get the attention of our
Hmm.
legislators?
Well, uh, when there's an issue that you care about, you need to pick up the phone, call them or text them, and let them know how you feel about the issue. Um, you know, Politics is not an ideas game. Politicians don't know how to read the bills. I'm not even sure they know how to read, period. They're illiterate. I'm exaggerating, but only a little bit. They may not know how to read, but I guarantee you they know how to count. And so while they may not be reading the bills, or they may be parroting the talking points that someone handed them, and they may be used to following the leader inside the chamber, ultimately they are absolutely going to count how many calls, emails, texts they get from their voters on a particular issue, because they know that elections are often decided by very, very small margins of people. Especially in a state level primary election, like a Republican primary, those can come down to just a few votes. I've seen um, long-standing legislators lose their job of many decades by as few as 30 or 40 votes. And so I think, number one, reach out to them and tell them what you expect of them. If they work for you, then you should treat that relationship like they work for you. And then if they don't do what you ask, then you should do what any employer would do to an employee who doesn't do what they're asked to do. You fire them. And the way you fire your legislator is, number one, you run against them. If you don't run against them, they get a free pass. And that is the number one surefire way um, to rig an election in your favor. It works 100% of the time, and it is totally 100% legal, and that is to not have anyone run against you. Um, and unfortunately, we the people, we do that to ourselves. Okay, if we're not running against badly behaved legislators, then we are doing this to ourselves, and we deserve everything that we get from them. Um, and you do that, and maybe you win, and maybe you don't, but you're going to change their behavior either way. Um, so and then finally, you have to stay vigilant. I think I want to say it was Thomas Jefferson, that said that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And there were many things he meant by that, including the willingness to lay down one's life for liberty if necessary, if tyranny goes to that level. Um, but one of the things that it means is it's never enough. It's never You never get to just go home and retire. You never just get to say, all right, I got my guy in office, or my party's in control. Everything's going to be okay. I think that is really a dangerous false sense of security um, that the desire for a strong man leads us into. That once you get your strong man in office, that everything's going to be fine. And reality is nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, and that's part of why I created a speech after Trump got elected. Don't fall asleep in the second half.
Right.
I've heard too many stories about when Reagan was elected that everybody fell asleep. Everybody,
Hmm.
just kind of went to sleep. And as good as Reagan was, I mean, what did he sign into law? We can't sue the vaccine companies anymore.
Yep.
Manufacture fully automatic firearms, no fault divorce. I mean, there's a lot of things that he did that while everybody was asleep, that had they not been asleep, he probably wouldn't have done or done
Yeah.
less of them.
Right.
But that's what happens. And I think, with the election in 2020 being, stolen, everybody was watching in 2024 because everybody was
Hmm.
watching them. It makes it harder to do nefarious things because everybody was
Right.
watching them.
Right.
And hopefully people will be watching ever vigilantly.
And that's what I
So,
hope the Bad Bill Sheet project will accomplish more than anything else, is to be an early warning system to the grassroots that here's a threat incoming. I mean, it's like our ballistic missile radar that our country has, and other countries like ours has, is when something's incoming, sirens start going off. And so, that's how you should read the Bad Bill Sheet. These are the incoming threats. And I'm sorry, but there's not a week, not a single week that goes by since I've started this project where the Bad Bill Sheet was blank. There's never even been a week where there was as few as one bad bill on it, unless you want to count back when I was only looking at House bills and it was budget week. Then yeah, maybe just one bill. But now I'm looking at both chambers, and there's never a week where you're even going to just have as few as one bad bill on the sheet. Usually it's a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, even as many as 4 dozen bad bills in any given week that are being considered. And as far as a kill ratio, our the kill ratio right now is of the bad bills that we've flagged and called out. There have been some very significant wins, like the Health Czar bill last year, but overall, I would say 2/3 to 3/4 of all bad bills that come up in the House and Senate end up passing and getting signed into law. It's a
yeah.
huge number. It's totally unacceptable. The grassroots are not yet doing what is necessary to kill all of these bills. And guess what? I've got news for you. Your Freedom Caucus, your favorite legislator in the House or the Senate, whoever they may be, and there are some good ones, they are either unable or unwilling um, to actually do the work to kill all of these bills. Now, it's in the House, it's definitely harder to kill bad bills because of the rules, but in the Senate, it only takes one individual senator to stop a bill in its dead in its tracks. And unless it's a really high priority for the powers that be, usually that's all it takes to stop the bill.
Indeed.
So, they're not going to do that until the people, their constituents, demand that they do it.
Well, we do need to utilize what our founding fathers called the disquietude of the people. And thanks for coming on, Jonathan. We're going to wrap this up a little bit. Tell them a little bit more about what you do, and we'll finish this segment out.
Yeah. So, professionally, I'm a software developer. Been doing that for about 20, 25 years. I'm self-taught in that. I was homeschooled from day one, oldest of six siblings. Grew up in rural South Carolina, where my dad was a pastor. And I got involved in politics around 2008 as an activist. I led a Tea Party organization in Anderson County. Um, Obamacare was kind of my big wake-up call, my red pill moment, as it were, with regard to politics. Um, and then, I by 2012, 2013, I got completely burned out from politics, walked away completely. Only short year later, to be just feel the inner compulsion to utilize what I knew to try to continue to make a difference. And so at that point, I decided to run for office. I went up against an 8-year Republican incumbent who had voted for the Bush bailout, TARP, and defeated him, and served for 8 years of my own, from 2014 to 2022. And I've continued to stay involved since then. I served about a year and a half as a GOP chairman, but through all that time, from about 2021 onward, continuously I've been doing the bad bill sheet, publishing that, reading the bills every single week, and interpreting them through the 12-point lens. You can read that on Substack now. It's readingscbills.substack.com, or use your favorite internet search engine and just search for Jonathan Hill Bad Bill Sheet, and it will come right up.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. This has been a gentleman's review, bringing you the news that the mainstream propaganda does not. Thank you.